My wife told me I was the reason for her anxiety, according to her therapist. Then she dropped the real bomb. She needed time to think about whether I was worth keeping in her life, and oh, by the way, I should probably change too. That's when I realized this wasn't about therapy at all. This was about control. It started on a Wednesday evening when she walked through the door with that particular expression I'd learned to recognize over our 3 years of marriage. Not angry, not sad, but something worse, smug satisfaction mixed with manufactured victimhood. She'd been going to therapy for about 4 months, claiming she needed help with work stress and general anxiety. I'd been supportive, even encouraging. Hell, I thought it was great that she was taking care of her mental health. "We need to talk," she announced, setting her purse down with the kind of deliberate precision that screamed, "I've been rehearsing this conversation." I looked up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing some documents. "Sure, what's on your mind?" She positioned herself across from me, hands folded, like she was about to deliver a diagnosis. "My therapist and I have been doing some deep work lately, and we've identified the root cause of my anxiety." The way she said, "we" bothered me immediately. Like her therapist was her new best friend, and I was some specimen they'd been analyzing together. "Okay," I said, closing the laptop to give her my full attention. "What did you figure out?" "It's you." She said it so matter-of-factly, like she was telling me the weather forecast. "You're the primary source of my stress and anxiety. The way you communicate, your expectations, your presence in my life. It's all contributing to my mental health struggles." I sat there for a moment, processing what I'd just heard. 3 years of marriage, and apparently I was a walking anxiety trigger. "Can you be more specific? What exactly am I doing that's causing this?" "It's not necessarily what you're doing," she continued, clearly sticking to some script she'd prepared. "It's who you are, your energy, your approach to things. My therapist says that sometimes people just aren't compatible on a fundamental level, and that incompatibility can manifest as chronic stress in the more sensitive partner." The more sensitive partner. Right. "So let me get this straight," I said, keeping my voice level. "After 4 months of therapy, the professional conclusion is that I'm toxic to your mental health just by existing?" "Don't be dramatic," she snapped, the rehearsed calm cracking slightly. "This isn't about blame. It's about recognition and growth." "Growth," I repeated. "Whose growth are we talking about here?" This is where she pulled out what I can only describe as the masterstroke of manipulative psychology. She leaned forward, her voice taking on this concerned, almost loving tone. "I need time to think about whether this relationship is sustainable for my well-being. Whether you're someone I can see a future with, given how you affect my mental state." She paused for effect. "And honestly, I think you need to do some serious self-reflection too. Maybe consider your own therapy to work on these patterns." There it was. The ultimatum wrapped in therapeutic language. She needed time to decide if I was worth keeping, and I needed to fundamentally change who I was to even be considered worthy of that decision. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. She looked so pleased with herself, so confident that she'd just delivered the perfect psychological checkmate. The concerned wife, bravely advocating for her mental health while generously offering her husband a chance to redeem himself. "How much time do you need?" I asked. She seemed surprised by my calm response. Probably expected me to start defending myself, explaining why I wasn't the monster she'd painted, begging for another chance. "I'm not sure. Maybe a few weeks? A month? However long it takes for me to gain clarity." She tilted her head sympathetically. "And for you to show some real commitment to changing these problematic behaviors." I nodded slowly, like I was seriously considering her generous offer. "So you want to take time to evaluate whether I'm worth keeping in your life?" "Exactly. I'm glad you understand. And during this evaluation period, I'm supposed to transform myself into whatever version of me you and your therapist have decided might be acceptable. It's not about becoming someone else," she said, backpedaling slightly. "It's about becoming the best version of yourself." I stood up from my chair and walked to the window, looking out at our quiet suburban street. Behind me, I could hear her shifting in her seat, probably wondering why I wasn't reacting the way she'd expected. "You know what's interesting about this whole situation?" I said, not turning around. "What?" "You've spent 4 months in therapy, paying someone to help you figure out your problems, and the big breakthrough is that it's all my fault." I turned to face her. That must have been such a relief. Her confidence wavered for just a second. "That's not. It's more complex than that." "Is it?" "Because from where I'm sitting, It sounds like you found yourself a professional who validates whatever story you want to tell about our marriage. And now you're using that validation to put me on trial. You're twisting this around, she said, her voice rising slightly. This is exactly the kind of defensive behavior that my therapist warned me about. You can't even hear feedback without making me the villain. I almost laughed at that. Almost. Instead, I just smiled, which seemed to unsettle her more than any argument would have. You're absolutely right, I said. I think you should definitely take all the time you need to figure out whether I'm worth keeping around. For the first time since she'd started this conversation, she looked uncertain. You agree? Completely. In fact, I think you should take unlimited time. Really dig deep, explore all your options, see what else is out there. I sat back down, completely relaxed now. Take as much time as you need to decide if I'm worth your precious mental health. She stared at me. Clearly this wasn't going according to plan. I want to work on this together, but I need space to think clearly. Absolutely. You should have all the space you need. I picked up my laptop and reopened it. Just make sure you take that space somewhere else. The next morning, she was gone, packed a bag and left to stay with her sister, leaving behind a note about needing clarity and hoping I'd use this time productively. What she didn't know was that I was about to use this time very productively indeed, just not in the way she'd imagined. See, here's the thing about living with someone for 3 years. You learn their patterns, their habits, their tells. And over the past 4 months, since she'd started therapy, I'd noticed some interesting changes. Not just in how she talked to me, but in how she talked about everything. Her stories had become more dramatic, her grievances more elaborate, and her version of events increasingly creative. It started with small things. She'd tell her friends about arguments we'd had, but her version would be wildly different from what actually happened. I'd overhear phone conversations where I was apparently controlling because I'd asked her to let me know if she'd be home late for dinner, or emotionally unavailable because I didn't want to dissect every minor disagreement for hours. But I chalked it up to normal venting. Everyone exaggerates a little when they're frustrated, right? Now, sitting in my quiet house, I realized it might be more than that. I decided to do some digging. Her laptop was still here. She'd only taken her work computer. I knew her passwords because we'd always been open about that stuff, back when we trusted each other. What I found in her browser history was enlightening, to say the least. Dozens of articles about emotional abuse, gaslighting, narcissistic partners, forums about surviving toxic relationships, blog posts with titles like How to Recognize When Your Partner is Destroying Your Mental Health and Why Leaving a Manipulative Spouse is Self-Care. But the real goldmine was her email drafts folder. She'd been writing detailed summaries of our interactions, apparently to review before therapy sessions. Except these summaries read like fiction. According to her notes, I was a master manipulator who used subtle intimidation tactics and emotional warfare to control her. The time I'd suggested we create a household budget, I was financially controlling and trying to restrict her independence. When I'd asked her to pick up her clothes from the bedroom floor, nitpicking and criticism designed to erode my self-esteem. The evening I'd been quiet because I was stressed about a work deadline, silent treatment as punishment for not meeting his emotional needs. Every normal interaction, every minor disagreement, every human moment had been twisted into evidence of my supposed toxicity. She'd been building a case against me for months, collecting proof to take to her therapist. But the most interesting discovery was a series of draft emails to her sister, never sent, where she practiced different versions of our conflicts. I watched her story evolve through multiple drafts, getting more dramatic each time, until the final version bore almost no resemblance to what had actually happened. My personal favorite was her account of the time she'd forgotten to pay the electric bill and our power got shut off. In reality, I just sighed, called the utility company, and sorted it out while she apologized profusely. In her therapeutic narrative, I'd exploded in rage, berated her for being irresponsible, and made her feel worthless and incompetent. I sat back in my chair, pieces clicking into place. This wasn't therapy. This was performance art, with me as the unwitting villain in her one-woman show about surviving an abusive marriage. The brilliant part was how she'd positioned herself. She wasn't leaving me. Oh no, that would make her look bad. She was working on the relationship by going to therapy. She wasn't making demands. She was just advocating for her mental health. She wasn't manipulating me. She was offering me the opportunity to grow. My phone buzzed with a text from her. How are you processing everything? I hope you're taking this seriously and considering therapy for yourself. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Processing quite well, actually. Learning a lot about patterns and behaviors. Very eye-opening. Her response came quickly. I'm glad you're being open to self-reflection. That gives me hope. Hope. She actually thought I was sitting here agonizing over how to become worthy of her continued presence in my life. I spent the rest of the day going through more of her digital breadcrumbs. Screenshots of text conversations with friends where she'd painted me as increasingly problematic. Research on how to help a partner recognize their toxic behaviors. Even a Pinterest board titled New Beginning, filled with pictures of studio apartments and inspirational quotes about choosing yourself. The woman had been planning her exit strategy for months, but she wanted to be the hero of the story. The brave survivor who tried everything to save her marriage before finally, reluctantly, choosing herself over a man who just couldn't change. Except she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed I'd play my assigned role, the desperate husband begging for another chance, proving her narrative about my neediness and emotional instability. She'd expected me to chase, to plead, to demonstrate exactly the kind of behavior she'd been telling her therapist about. Instead, I was sitting here getting a masterclass in manipulation, watching her carefully constructed fiction fall apart in real time. My phone rang. Her sister. Hey, she said, her voice careful and diplomatic. I just wanted to check in on you. I know this situation with my sister is complicated. Complicated is one word for it, I replied. She's really struggling right now. The therapy has brought up a lot of difficult realizations about your relationship dynamics. I almost laughed. Even her sister was reading from the same script. I'm sure it has, I said. Must be very validating to finally have a professional confirm that all her problems stem from external sources. There was a pause. That's not exactly how therapy works, isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like 4 months and probably a few $1,000s just to be told that she's perfect and I'm the problem. She doesn't think she's perfect. She's working really hard to understand herself and improve the relationship. By putting me on trial and demanding I change everything about myself while she continues exactly as she is. Another pause, longer this time. Maybe you should consider couples therapy together. Maybe she should consider finding a therapist who challenges her instead of enabling her victim complex. I could hear her sister's sharp intake of breath. That's really unfair. She's trying to save your marriage. No, I said calmly. She's trying to rewrite history so that whatever happens next, she's the good guy. But the thing about rewriting history is that it only works if everyone agrees to forget what actually happened. After I hung up, I realized something had crystallized for me. This whole situation wasn't about our marriage at all. It was about control, narrative, and the desperate need to never be wrong about anything. She wanted unlimited time to decide if I was worth keeping. Perfect. Time works both ways. And I was starting to reach some very interesting conclusions of my own. She came back on Saturday morning, looking refreshed and confident. Probably expected to find me broken down, ready to negotiate the terms of my rehabilitation. Instead, she found me in the kitchen making breakfast, completely at peace with the world. You look good, she said, clearly thrown off by my relaxed demeanor. I feel good, I replied, not looking up from the eggs I was scrambling. This time apart has been incredibly enlightening. She set her purse down carefully, studying my face for signs of the emotional devastation she'd anticipated. I'm glad you're using this time for self-reflection. Have you thought about finding a therapist? Oh, I've been doing plenty of research, I said, finally meeting her eyes. Amazing what you can learn when you really dig into patterns of behavior. Something in my tone made her stiffen slightly. What kind of research? I plated my eggs and sat down at the kitchen table, gesturing for her to join me. Well, I've been reading about therapeutic manipulation, victim complexes, historical revisionism in relationships. Fascinating stuff, really. Her confident expression flickered. I don't understand what you're getting at. Sure you do. I took a bite of my breakfast, letting the silence stretch. You've been very busy these past 4 months, haven't you? Building your case, crafting your narrative, collecting evidence of my supposed toxicity. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but your laptop, I said simply. Your draft emails, your browser history. Your very creative reinterpretations of our actual conversations. The color drained from her face. You went through my private things? That's exactly the kind of controlling behavior I was talking about. I laughed, actually laughed, which seemed to shock her more than anything else I could have done. See that right there? That's the pattern I've been learning about. Deflection, blame shifting, making yourself the victim even when you're caught red-handed. I am not. According to your therapeutic journal, I exploded in rage about the electric bill incident. Remember that? When you forgot to pay it, and I just called the company to get it sorted out. I leaned back in my chair. I'm curious, in which reality did this explosion of rage occur? Because I seem to have missed it. She opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly scrambling for a response. Or how about the time I became financially controlling by suggesting we make a budget? Or when my stress about a work deadline became silent treatment as emotional punishment? I shook my head. You've been rewriting our entire relationship to fit whatever narrative your therapist wanted to hear. You're twisting everything around, she said, but her voice lacked conviction now. Those were my feelings, my experiences of those situations. Your feelings, I repeated. Right. So when you feel like I'm being controlling, that automatically means I am controlling, regardless of what actually happened. Feelings are valid. Feelings are valid, but they're not facts. And you've been presenting your feelings as facts to a professional who's supposed to help you process reality, not validate your fantasies. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. You're doing it again. Invalidating my experience, making me question my own perceptions. This is gaslighting. No, I said calmly. This is me refusing to accept responsibility for problems I didn't create. There's a difference. My therapist warned me you'd react this way. She said that when confronted with their behavior, toxic partners always turn it around and make themselves the victim. Your therapist, I said, standing up and walking over to her, has been listening to a distorted version of our relationship for 4 months. She's basing her professional opinion on information that's been filtered through your need to never be wrong about anything. That's not true, isn't it? Tell me, in all these therapy sessions, have you ever once taken responsibility for anything that's gone wrong between us? Have you ever mentioned your tendency to rewrite conversations to make yourself look better? Your habit of dramatizing minor disagreements? Your pattern of collecting grievances like they're trading cards? She turned away from me, but I could see her reflection in the window. The confident mask was slipping. Have you told your therapist about the time you screamed at me for 20 minutes because I suggested we might want to discuss major purchases before making them? Or did that become another story about my financial control? Stop, she whispered. Have you mentioned how you regularly go through my phone, my emails, my conversations with friends, looking for evidence that I'm doing something wrong? Or is that just being concerned about the relationship? Stop it. What about the way you punish me with days of cold silence whenever I disagree with you about anything? Let me guess. That's setting boundaries, right? She spun around, tears in her eyes, but not the kind of tears that inspire sympathy. These were angry tears, frustrated tears. The tears of someone whose carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. You're being cruel, she said. I'm being honest. Maybe for the first time in months. I sat back down, completely calm. See, while you were taking time to decide whether I'm worth keeping, I was taking time to decide whether this relationship is worth saving. And you know what I discovered? She stared at me, waiting. I discovered that I've been living in a funhouse mirror version of reality, where every normal human interaction gets twisted into evidence of my character flaws, where I'm constantly walking on eggshells, trying not to trigger your next therapeutic breakthrough about my supposed toxicity. That's not. I've been so busy defending myself against accusations that have no basis in reality that I forgot to ask the important question, why am I with someone who needs me to be the villain in their story? The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of the coffee maker finishing its cycle. I've been thinking a lot about patterns too, I continued. And you know what pattern I see? Someone who's so terrified of being responsible for their own unhappiness that they'll sacrifice their marriage to avoid that accountability. She sank into the chair across from me, looking smaller somehow. You wanted time to evaluate whether I'm worth keeping in your life? I said quietly. Well, congratulations. You've helped me realize that the person I married, the one who could admit when she was wrong, who could have actual conversations instead of building cases, that person doesn't exist anymore. And I'm not interested in auditioning for the approval of whoever you've become. Her phone buzzed with what was probably a supportive text from her sister or her therapist. She glanced at it, then back at me. So what are you saying? She asked. I'm saying that your unlimited time to think starts now. And while you're thinking, you can do it somewhere else. She stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. This wasn't how her script was supposed to go. In her version, I was supposed to crumble under the weight of her psychological insights, beg for guidance on how to become worthy of her consideration, maybe even thank her for the opportunity to grovel. You're kicking me out? She asked, her voice rising in disbelief. I'm facilitating your need for clarity, I corrected, standing up and walking to the coffee maker. You said you needed unlimited time to think about whether I'm worth keeping around. I'm just making sure you get exactly what you asked for. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I poured myself a cup of coffee, taking my time. Really? Because you were pretty specific. You need time to evaluate our relationship, time to decide if I'm compatible with your mental health, time to see if I'm someone you can build a future with. I turned to face her. I'm giving you all the time and space you need to figure that out. I meant we'd work on it together, that you'd show me you were committed to changing. I see the confusion. I leaned against the counter, completely relaxed. You thought this was a negotiation where I'd compete for the privilege of staying married to someone who considers my existence a threat to their well-being. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to catch flies. But here's the thing about ultimatums, I continued. They only work if the other person is desperate to avoid the consequences. And honestly, the idea of you taking unlimited time to decide if I'm worth it sounds fantastic. Revolutionary, even. You don't mean that. I absolutely do. In fact, I'm wondering why we didn't think of this sooner. I sat back down, gesturing enthusiastically. You get all the space you need to explore your options, really dig deep into whether you can do better than this anxiety-inducing monster you married. No pressure, no timeline, complete freedom to evaluate the market. She was looking at me like I'd lost my mind. This is ridiculous. We're married. We work through problems together. Are we working through problems together? Because from where I sit, it looks like you've spent 4 months building a legal case against me with a paid professional, then presented me with a verdict disguised as an opportunity for redemption. That's not. You literally told me you needed to think about whether I was worth keeping. Those were your exact words. I pulled out my phone. Would you like me to play back the recording? Her face went white. You recorded our conversation? I hadn't. But her immediate panic told me everything I needed to know about how that conversation would sound played back objectively. Relax, I said, putting the phone away. But your reaction is interesting. Almost like you know exactly how manipulative that whole performance was. She slumped back in her chair, the fight going out of her. I wasn't trying to manipulate you. I was trying to save our marriage. By threatening to end it unless I fundamentally change who I am. By creating space for us both to grow. Us both. I laughed. Right, because you've been doing so much growing. For months of therapy, and the only thing you've learned is that everything wrong with your life is my fault. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the table. When she looked up, there was something different in her eyes. Not the confident righteousness from before, but something smaller, more desperate. What do you want me to do? She asked quietly. I want you to take the time you asked for. Really take it. Go stay with your sister, or your parents, or get that studio apartment you've been pinning on your secret Pinterest board. She flinched. Of course I'd found that too. I want you to experience what life looks like without this terrible, anxiety-inducing husband ruining your mental health every day. I want you to wake up tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that without my toxic presence contaminating your peaceful existence. And then what? I shrugged. Then you'll have your answer about whether I'm worth keeping around. And I'll have mine about whether I want to be kept. That stopped her cold. What do you mean? I mean that while you're taking unlimited time to decide if I meet your standards, I'll be taking unlimited time to decide if you meet mine. Seems fair, doesn't it? For the first time in this entire conversation, she looked genuinely scared. You're talking about ending our marriage. I'm talking about both of us getting what we apparently need. You get space to evaluate whether you can do better than someone who causes you chronic anxiety just by existing. I get space to evaluate whether I want to spend my life with someone who needs me to be the villain in their personal growth story. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window again. This isn't how this was supposed to go. How was it supposed to go? She turned back to me, and for a moment, the mask slipped completely. You were supposed to fight for us. You were supposed to show me that you cared enough to change. There it was, the real script. She'd wanted me to chase, to beg, to prove my devotion by accepting full responsibility for her unhappiness and promising to become whatever version of me she decided was acceptable. Why would I fight for someone who's already decided I'm not worth fighting for? I asked quietly. I never said you weren't worth fighting for. You said you needed time to think about whether I was worth keeping. Same thing. She started crying then, but not the manipulative tears from before. These were the tears of someone who'd just realized their strategy had backfired spectacularly. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. Then you probably shouldn't have put our marriage up for review and assigned yourself the role of judge and jury. I finished my coffee and stood up, walking past her toward the stairs. Where are you going? To pack your bags, I said without turning around. You've got unlimited thinking to do, and I want to make sure you have everything you need to do it properly. This is insane. You can't just kick me out of my own house. I paused at the bottom of the stairs. You're right. It's your house too, which is why I'm not kicking you out. I'm facilitating your therapeutic journey toward clarity. Your therapist should be proud. You're finally prioritizing your mental health by removing yourself from the source of your anxiety. Stop throwing my therapy back in my face. Why? It's given you such valuable insights, like how I'm the reason for all your problems and how you need space to decide if I'm worth the damage I apparently caused to your well-being. I started up the stairs. I'm just making sure you get to fully experience life without that burden. An hour later, her bags were packed and sitting by the front door. She stood there looking lost, like she couldn't quite believe how quickly her power play had turned into an eviction notice. How long? She asked. How long what? How long do I have to figure this out? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You said unlimited time. I'm a man of my word. Take all the time you need. She picked up her bags, paused at the door, and looked back at me one more time. What if I decide I want to work on this? What if I realize I was wrong? Then you'll have learned something valuable about yourself, I said. And I'll have learned something valuable about what I'm willing to accept in a relationship. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and for the first time in months, the house was completely quiet. The first week without her was a revelation. Not in the way she'd probably hoped. Not me sitting alone realizing how empty my life was without her constant psychological evaluations. No, it was the opposite. It was like someone had turned off a noise I hadn't realized was always there. I woke up when I wanted to wake up, not when she decided it was time for our morning check-in about my emotional state. I ate what I wanted without having to navigate whether my food choices somehow reflected deeper character flaws. I watched TV without commentary on how my viewing habits revealed my avoidance patterns. For the first time in months, I could just exist without being analyzed. But the real eye-opener came when I started reconnecting with friends I'd gradually distanced myself from. Turned out, that hadn't been my choice at all. Over the past year, she'd systematically undermined those relationships with constant critiques and manufactured emergencies that always seemed to coincide with my plans. My friend called me Tuesday evening, surprised to hear from me. Man, where have you been? We haven't seen you in months. It's complicated, I said. Everything okay with you and the wife? She seemed pretty tense the last few times we all hung out. We talked for an hour, and I realized how much I'd missed just having normal conversations with people who weren't constantly psychoanalyzing my word choices. Meanwhile, my phone was lighting up with increasingly frantic messages from her. The confident woman who'd needed unlimited time to think was apparently having some second thoughts about the unlimited part. Day 3. I hope you're using this time productively. Maybe we should set up a check-in schedule. Day 5. I've been thinking about what you said, and I think we both said things we didn't mean. Day 7. This silent treatment isn't helping anyone. We need to communicate. Silent treatment. I almost laughed at that one. I wasn't giving her the silent treatment. I was giving her exactly what she'd asked for. Space to think without my toxic presence contaminating her decision-making process. But the messages kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. I never said I wanted to break up. I said I wanted to work on things. You're being vindictive and cruel. My therapist says this behavior is very concerning. Of course, her therapist was still involved, probably working overtime to help her figure out how to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely out of her grasp. The breaking point came 2 weeks in. I was having dinner with my brother when she showed up at the restaurant. Just walked right up to our table like she owned the place, tears streaming down her face. "We need to talk," she announced, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. My brother looked uncomfortable. "Maybe I should." "No," I said calmly. "She was just leaving." "I am not leaving. You can't just ignore me forever." "I'm not ignoring you. I'm respecting your need for space to make important decisions about our future. That's not what this is, and you know it." I stood up, left money on the table. "You're right. This is me discovering what my life looks like without someone who considers my existence a threat to their mental health. And you know what? It's pretty great. You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" "Because 2 weeks ago, you told me I was the source of your anxiety. You said you needed time to decide if I was worth keeping around. Now you're chasing me down in restaurants demanding attention." I shook my head. "Which version is the real you?" She looked around, suddenly aware that everyone was staring at us. "Can we please talk about this privately?" We did talk about it privately. "You made your position very clear." I changed my mind. "That's interesting," I said. "What changed? Did you suddenly realize I'm not actually toxic? Or did you just realize that unlimited time means unlimited time for me to think too?" She scrambled for an answer that wouldn't make her look like the manipulative game player she'd revealed herself to be. "I miss you," she said finally. "You miss controlling me," I corrected. "There's a difference." After my brother left, she slid into his chair. "Please, can we just go home and talk about this like adults?" "We are talking about it like adults. You made an adult decision to put our marriage on trial. I made an adult decision to let you live with the consequences." She was quiet for a moment. Then her expression changed. Less desperate, more calculating. "Fine," she said. "You want to play this game? My lawyer says I have every right to return to my own house." There it was. When manipulation failed, she moved straight to threats. "Your lawyer?" I laughed. "You've been gone for 2 weeks and you already have a lawyer? That's some pretty fast thinking for someone who just needed space to work on our relationship." Her face flushed red. She'd just revealed that this whole thinking time had been spent consulting divorce attorneys, not reflecting on our marriage. "You know what's fascinating?" I said, standing up. 2 weeks ago, you were the concerned wife trying to save our marriage. Now you're threatening legal action. Which role are you planning to play next?" I started walking toward the exit, then turned back. "You're absolutely right about one thing. It is your house too. Come back whenever you want. Just remember, unlimited time works both ways. And my thinking time is just getting started." She came back 3 days later, key in hand, expecting to walk into a house where a broken man was waiting to negotiate his way back into her good graces. Instead, she found me in the living room, reading a book, completely at peace. "We need to have a serious conversation," she announced, setting down her bags like she was moving back in permanently. I looked up from my book, marked my place, and set it aside. "Absolutely. How did your thinking go?" She blinked, clearly thrown off by my calm demeanor. "My thinking, the unlimited time you needed to decide whether I was worth keeping around. I'm curious what conclusions you reached." "I reached the conclusion that we both made mistakes, and we need to work together to rebuild our relationship." I nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting. So after all that reflection, your big breakthrough is that we both made mistakes." "Yes, and I'm willing to forgive you for how you handled this situation if you're willing to acknowledge your part in our problems." I almost laughed. "Almost. How generous of you. I'm being serious. My therapist says that healing requires both partners to take accountability." "Your therapist?" I repeated. "The same one who helped you conclude that I was the source of your anxiety?" "She's helped me understand that relationships are complex and blame isn't productive." I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at our quiet street. "You know what's funny about this whole situation?" "What?" "You spent weeks building a case against me, convinced yourself I was toxic, put our marriage on trial, and demanded I change everything about myself to earn your approval." I turned to face her. "But you never once asked the most important question." "What question?" "Whether I wanted to stay married to someone who needed me to be the villain in their story." Her confident expression faltered. "That's not. I never made you a villain. Didn't you?" For months of rewriting our history, collecting evidence of my supposed toxicity, presenting ultimatums disguised as opportunities for growth. I shook my head. "You turned our marriage into a courtroom where you were judge, jury, and prosecutor all at once." I was trying to improve our relationship. No, you were trying to avoid taking responsibility for your own unhappiness. It's much easier to blame me than to do actual self-reflection. She sat down heavily, looking smaller than when she'd walked in. So what are you saying? I sat across from her, my decision already made. I'm saying that you had unlimited time to decide whether I was worth keeping. Well, I used that same time to decide whether you were worth keeping. The silence stretched between us. And, she whispered, and I've reached my verdict. I leaned forward, my voice calm but final. I don't want to be married to someone who sees me as a problem to be solved rather than a partner to be loved. That's not how I see you, isn't it? Because for 4 months, every interaction we had was filtered through your therapeutic interpretation of my supposed character flaws. Every conversation became evidence for your case about why I needed to change. She started crying, but these weren't the manipulative tears from before. These were the tears of someone who finally understood that actions have consequences. I can change, she said desperately. I can stop going to that therapist. We can start fresh. I can. You can what? Pretend you didn't spend months systematically destroying our relationship while convincing yourself you were saving it. People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated campaign to rewrite our entire marriage so that nothing was ever your fault. I stood up again, feeling oddly light. And the scariest part is, you almost had me convinced. What do you mean? I mean that for a while there. I actually started wondering if you were right. If I really was this toxic presence ruining your life. You're very good at what you do. She looked up at me with something like hope in her eyes. So you understand why I felt like I needed help. I understand that you felt like you needed validation for a story you'd already decided to tell. And you found a professional willing to give you that validation in exchange for money. The hope died in her eyes. The person I married would have talked to me directly about problems instead of building a secret case file. She would have taken responsibility for her own happiness instead of making me responsible for it. She would have fought for our marriage instead of putting it on trial. I walked to the front door and opened it. I wish you the best in finding someone whose existence doesn't threaten your mental health. Someone who's grateful for the opportunity to audition for your approval. She stood up slowly, understanding finally dawning. You're really ending this. No, I corrected. You ended this 4 months ago when you decided I was the enemy. I'm just acknowledging reality. She picked up her bags, paused at the door, and looked back one more time. What if I was wrong about everything? I smiled, but there was sadness in it now. Then you'll have learned something valuable for your next relationship. And so will I. The door closed behind her with a soft click. I stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet house, then picked up my book and continued reading. For the first time in months, I didn't have to analyze my own behavior or walk on eggshells or defend my right to exist without being labeled toxic. I was finally free to just be myself. And myself was pretty great company.